What is up, everybody, and welcome back to Aiden's World of Sports, the best podcast on YouTube. And for today's episode, I have a very special guest, and that guest is Zachary Schuz Schumaker. He's another YouTube creator. He's been doing this for about almost 3 years now. He's 19. He lives in Arizona, and he started off interviewing his brother, a D1 basketball recruit, and now he has grown to interview five-star commits, recruits, NFL and NBA draft prospects, college basketball studs, and more. And so today we sit down and talk with him about really his journey throughout this YouTube channel and what he really looks to do in the future with his YouTube channel and with his life in general. And so without further ado, thank you for coming on, and I introduce you guys, Zach Schumaker. All right, everybody. So as I said, I'm welcoming Zach Schumaker Schuz into the podcast. Did I pronounce that right?
Yep, pretty good. Yep.
So you've been in this game for quite a while now. You really got around to a lot of big name athletes, a lot of big name coaches, and you cover really all sports. A lot of NBA, a lot of college basketball, which is really cool because it's growing. And as it's growing, I see your channel is also growing. You're getting a lot of people that big names for this draft class coming up. So someone I want to really focus on is Ohio guard Mark Sears. You interviewed him recently, and the interview that you guys had was really, really good. I watched that at least twice. I watched everything at least twice just to see what he talks about. And I watched his game and replicated it. How do you pick out his game? Do you watch games and pick out highlights and talk to him about that, or is it just you see stuff and you ask questions off the rip?
Yeah, so it's really a mixture of different things. I'm always grown up loving the game of basketball. It's always been a passion of mine. And growing up, I actually wanted to be an NBA general manager to begin with. So I've always had more so of the obviously play growing up too, but I've always looked at players in terms of the game, evaluating how I think they're going to pan out and whatnot. That's why I do talk to a lot of coaches about different players and that recruiting aspect too. But I always like watching both aspects. There's obviously guys that you just see have a high platform and numbers and all, and I'll have them on too. But for a lot of guys, a lot of the countries, I mean, unless you really study the game of basketball and know it, you're not going to know too many guys from Ohio until March Madness something happens. Then obviously everyone's on an equal platform, you hear them. But something like Mark Sears, I watched the game, I've watched him multiple times. Got his team a little bit in high school, more towards the end of it in the final AAU season, but he obviously has, like I said, I love watching his game. He puts up the numbers. Ohio's having an incredible season, should be in the tournament this year. It all just kind of came together. And then when we come into a conversation, it's going through, I was like kind of go through the story, how they got to where they're at. So we go through that portion. But in terms of games, he obviously has certain games he might want to talk on. There's some other big ones. Obviously, the biggest matchup in the MAC, the MAC, is Ohio, Toledo, the two top teams, him versus Ryan Rollins. So those are kind of things I like keying in on, going through games, breaking down the game, but also just evaluating, kind of seeing who I think also is good players, like to get them on too.
Yeah, it's important. And so far, you have a lot of huge recruits. I mean, Kyle Flip. I can't pronounce these guys' names, but he's committed to Duke.
Mm-hmm.
You have such wide range of athletes coming on from people who are unknown really until they see some people probably are unknown until they see some of your episodes. A lot of people probably wouldn't know who these people are, and they see you interview them, and then they become like a fan sort of. But then there's also people that you're interviewing who are top 10 recruits in the nation. So how do you get in touch with them? I want to know personally for me, but maybe for people who want to do this, who are watching this too.
Yeah, so I started off, like I said, I've always wanted basketball as the main sport I keyed in on, and I've grown ever since. I'll kind of go through that in a second. But to begin with, I was a high school player. I had to stop because of different medical stuff kind of caught up to me, and I had to end up deciding, it's time for me to move on. God's got a different plan for me. So at that point, I decided to go into basketball. At that point, I didn't know what it was going to be. I just decided to almost have a talk show in a sense where I was just talking with myself about basketball. Then I kind of started studying some podcasts and realized, okay, it'd be good to have guests on. Started getting some people like my brother. He's also a Division I recruit. He's playing Lance Shoemaker. So I kind of started with him. Started with some of the coaches I grew up knowing. The first notable player, I should say, was Mitch Lightfoot. He's at Kansas State right now for them. He's a close family friend. That was pretty much the very first Division I college player I had. And then I didn't have another one for about almost a year, I'd say, because then it took me time to grow just because of the relationship we had growing up with each other. But guys like that. And then I really keyed on, like I said, just getting the guys I've known. I grew up in Arizona. That's where I still live. And so the guys I played with or against and trained with were guys like Ty Washington, Deron Holmes, Sodorok Naganga, a lot of these other top 100 recruits that I just naturally knew. Obviously, a lot of the guys weren't big. Like Ty, the first time I interviewed him, he only had 3 offers. It was Montana, Pepperdine, maybe. I don't know. I can't remember exactly. It was 3 low major schools. Deron was kind of more well known than Ty at the time, but so I just kind of started knowing these guys, interviewing them, getting to know them. And as that grew, it just kind of led to one connection after the next. I started getting to know other players from AU teams. More guys were like, hey, I want to go to hop on. Can we do an interview? This, then, the third. And eventually it grew to now where I just kind of known these guys since they were coming to high school as freshmen or sophomore. And we just kind of grew in that. At this point now, I've got to a point where most high school recruits and people in the basketball world had an idea of me and would, if there was someone that's comfortable doing interviews, they'd want to come on. So now it just is pretty much either know them already, they'll just DM me. Something kind of just works like that. But for those that do want to get started into it, like I said, it's kind of starting small. I mean, you're not going to start off with a top 5 recruit, most likely, unless you have a prior relationship with them. So you're just kind of getting more and more respect, kind of more and more people getting to know who you are, your story, your background, what you do, how well you do it. And as that grows, more people get to know you. So at that point, after about the 2020 class was the first time I knew some college guys. It wasn't too many, but that 2021 recruiting class this year's freshmen, so Jabari Smith and Paulo and Chad and Blake Wesley, the list goes on, all the guys in the freshman class this year. I knew those guys since they were sophomores and in some case freshmen. So it was a lot easier. And now it's like, okay, it's interviewing college guys, but at the same time, it's interviewing guys I've already interviewed before, prior relationships. And there's been some guys like Isaiah Brockington and some of the other guys that are Kyle Lofton and Buddy Boeheim and all those other guys that are seniors, just because of me interviewing other guys, they get to know me. So it kind of grows in that aspect. And same thing with the NBA. Josh Primo, I haven't interviewed him yet. Again, we're going to do one probably in the offseason, but I've known him since he was unranked, not talked about, coming in from Canada to AZ Compass. We just grew that relationship as well there. And the list kind of goes on. There's a lot of guys, like I said, I think there's about 11 guys I know right now that are pretty well that can interview at any time that's in the NBA. This upcoming draft class, I know probably about 20 to 30 different guys going to be in it, if not more than that. And it's going to keep growing more and more as you go on. So that's how you end up getting the NBA guys. And I'm sure as I get more and more NBA guys, there might be other guys that want to hop on too eventually. So that's the aspect. And then just this year, now I started up doing football players as well. Not going to do too many high school football players. Mostly it's going to be college players and NFL prospects and whatnot. But just kind of growing in that aspect. And that's obviously a new field, but just kind of growing in that way too.
Yeah, I mean, it's like people grow laterally, but then you could also expand. And what you're doing for expanding and just talk shows and podcasts usually are better when they, people watch them more when they tend to stick to one sport, but evolving into multiple sports is something that people really want to see, because you want to get a taste of all different kinds of athletes and all athletes that have played so many sports that can teach you so many lessons. So you're evolving and you're changing things and kind of building things that I want to build off on. In a way, I started watching your podcast a while back. I watched an episode. It was on my explore page on YouTube. And I saw it. This was before I really wanted to do a podcast, but I knew somewhat in the direction I was going. And so to have you here today through DMs, it's a relationship that you build, like you just said, is something cool. And so what do you think your goals are for this upcoming year, for just you specifically, for your channel?
That's a unique thing. I think always for me, I've always been someone that has the long-term goals first, and it's building up to that point, which eventually I want to have my own TV show on a sport network. So that's the end goal. Obviously, having that at the age of 19 is unlikely, obviously. So that's something that's more towards, I'm working everything towards that eventual goal down the road. But for this year, I'd say I think the biggest thing when I took a couple months off to just get content out, rebrand in a sense, get new ideas and concepts. That's when I add on the football aspect. So that's something that growing in that field, I don't know where God's going to take me in that aspect. Could it work out great? Do I end up becoming both sports, covering heavily, whatever that looks like, I'll see as the year goes on. But I think the biggest thing is, I wouldn't say obviously I have basketball and locks, obviously so much more to accomplish, but I've got a firm kind of control where I know the players, I know how it's going to work. I understand it. It just goes with it now. So growing in aspects, still getting more and more college guys, high school guys, and now NBA guys as well is going to be the big thing, but also just seeing where could I go in football? Is it even maybe another sport? Is it whatever it is, just kind of growing, but ultimately the end goal would just be getting as many steps possible closer to the end goal I have set for myself.
Yeah, I completely see where you're going with you have big aspirations, but obviously no one hits those big goals immediately. No one takes off like that. It's not, I mean, I guess TikTok people do now, but we're definitely not TikTok people. And so, yeah, there's some things that you have to learn along the way for sure. Cause I have somewhat similar goals where I wake up, I'm like, one day I'll be on ESPN and I'm watching Sports Center, but it takes some time. And I completely noticed that. I just have a question for you. This is kind of going to be an interview, just asking you questions about stuff that you've learned. What's something that you've really learned that you stuck with from one specific interview that you think will always stick with you?
That's also an interesting question because I think you learn more things every time you do an interview because there's always stuff to grow in. No one's ever gonna be perfect. Even the best interviewers out there that you look on like late night shows or whatever that might be, there's always room to grow. And I think just sitting back, evaluating, growing every time is something. Like, there's obviously like the obvious ones, like the pretty much simple things. Make sure the record's on. Make sure you stay looking at the camera type of stuff. Make sure you interact. Make sure that learn how to get the conversation and keep going. Like, those are kind of the basic things you just learn. But I say every time, just like the simple thing that some people might look at is eliminating certain words like the likes or the those type of things. I'm trying to think any of those other kind of like little words you don't need to put into different sentences. That's something that just you learn over time that you don't necessarily need to focus on. Slowing down when you're talking in a way. There's just so many different things you kind of have to learn to take out of what you do in an interview. And that's kind of what you have to grow in over time. And that's what I'm still improving on each time I talk and do an interview. So those are kind of the biggest things that when you're doing an interview, it's just slowly watching more people, watching some of the biggest podcasts out there. That can be sports, that can be music, that can be whatever the show or interview is. Like, there's always things to learn from an interview. So taking those things and applying them into yours, as well as at the same time adding your own spin on things too, making it unique in your own way, is definitely things that you can just take every single day and also just grow on in every single interview.
Yeah, I completely see that where you're coming from with there. Growth is always something that you could achieve. There's always somewhere you could grow and something you can do better. So I think I have to take that into account too, because it's for everyone. Honestly, that's great advice for anyone who's watching this, anyone who's seeing this at any point in time, even if it's years down the line and you see one of us on TV or whatever it may be. Please, that's a great thing of advice.
Yeah.
I think also something that I think people take for granted is with growth on social media. I'm going to completely spin off what you said, but people take for granted growth as an expansion of like your platform. I think what's something for you that I want to talk about is the time it took to build your platform, because you've been working at this for quite a while, it seems, and you've been building it up from really like the bottom, and you've come up to somewhere where you're nearing the top of the game for young influencers in the sports media industry. And it's something that I want to key in with you about. Where did you really get the idea to start this, and what really motivated you to keep building this platform over the course of, now it's almost 2 years or 3 years now, right?
Yeah. So it's going to be 3 years on my birthday, actually the day after my birthday in March. So it's almost 3 years, but it was a unique thing. I kind of mentioned earlier that I grew up playing basketball. I was born into a family that wasn't basketball parents to a sense. My mom played and was going to play in college, and they mostly were just that they love basketball. That was the sport that they preferred. I was born in March, so right during March Madness, and my baby pictures were taken in Jayhawk stuff, basketball Jayhawk jersey and all that. So I was born into a family. Now my brother is much more talented as a basketball player. As I said, he's a Division I recruit in 2023, but it was something that I just fell in love with right at the beginning. Obviously, I played soccer and little stuff like that growing up, but the main sport I fell in love with was basketball. And I played it all the way through middle school, played through most of high school. But in middle school, we actually moved to a new home. We had more poisoning and a whole bunch of other stuff happen where it made me end up missing majority of not just basketball, but also school and life pretty much for 7th, 8th grade and freshman year. So at that point, it was challenging, and there still was side effects I still have today, not as much as back then. I've healed a lot from it and all, but it made you miss a lot. And those are critical years in development for anybody. So at that point, I started kind of just like looking at things saying, okay, I know basketball wasn't always my end goal. I wanted to play as long as I possibly could, rather that be through college, overseas, NBA, if that always has the main dream, if that was to happen. But I always knew that the backup plan and the main plan and goal I wanted in life was to be an NBA general manager. So I started evaluating after my freshman year. I started praying more and more and saying, okay, God, what do you want me to do with my life? Where do you want me going? And at that point, I figured, okay, I want to be an NBA GM. So what can I do? I knew that most likely I wouldn't be hired for front office in any capacity yet as a high schooler. So I went to the NBA Summer League like I do every year with my dad. And I got to go actually meet quite a few NBA GMs, just went up to them, started talking to them, making connections with them. And then I also sent a lot of letters out to every single front office, and I got a lot back. Got to know countless GMs that I still even talk to and keep in touch with today. Some guys like a lot of different guys. I got to talk to Sean Marks from Brooklyn Nets, Kobe Altman from Cleveland. I talked to him, Mitch Kupchak from Charlotte. Both guys out there in Phoenix, and James Jones and Trevor Buckstein, Golden State, Bob Myers, and Aaron. There's a lot of different guys I got to know. John Hammond from Orlando. There's about 8 or 9 GMs I get to know and stay in contact with. So that was something. And I started talking to them and build a relationship with them. But obviously they can't really extend anything except for an internship after you graduate from college, or in some rare cases, they can do it your final year of college. At that point, I was only 16, 17 years old. So that wasn't even an option. So a lot of them just said, let's just stay in contact, whatnot, go from there. And so I looked at that. I'm like, okay, that's obviously not going to work right now. What else could I possibly do? I know basketball might be coming to an end. And as I kept praying, eventually I just came to my mind saying, okay, I have this time span. What am I going to do? I want to do basketball in some capacity. I went and actually ran a marathon. I did, for some reason, I still don't know exactly why that got put in my heart, but I did it, ran it for a charity event situation. That the next night, then after that, I ran it though, I just took a bath. Obviously, was still sore from the marathon. And all of a sudden it kind of came to me. I started a podcast, and like I said, I didn't know what to do. I had no one in my family that's been in the media in that sense. I've had no one in any extended family even go in the media. Didn't have too many connections. I was like, okay, I guess I love basketball. Let's see what happens. And from that point on, I just said, okay, let's do it. I learned at first I just did it through headphones and on an app called Anchor instead of even going face to face. And I just kind of went through it freeway, just my own mindset, what's going to happen, figure it out as on the go. And that's how I started building it. And obviously at that point, I don't know how many followers I was at. I wasn't too many though. So I just kind of built from there. And I knew obviously that I didn't know what I was doing. I just was kind of going with the flow, figuring it out as I go. And over time, more and more ideas came to me. I kept developing, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy. There are some guys that blow up, but majority of the time it doesn't happen too often unless you tell you on TV. So I just kind of stuck with it. I knew that's what God's placed in my heart, and that's still what he has in store for me. That's still what he wants me doing. So I just said, okay, whatever it is, I'm going to put my trust in you. I'm going to keep going with this path, figuring out what you want me doing with this. And I'll just stay true to it. I'll stay confident, stay going. And ultimately, I know that I have faith and trust in God that he's going to bring me to where I want and where he wants me to go when that time comes. So that's pretty much the biggest thing, just staying in your relationship with God, staying trusting him, and just kind of following whatever he's got in store for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really, really good story to come up from, like, uncertainty. Like I've never really talked about how I got into this with my channel, but it's somewhat not really I guess it's similar in a way where I never thought of being on making a podcast when last year I lived in New York City, had the world in my hand, and we moved to the suburbs of Long Island, and now I'm in a school where it actually is offered at sports broadcasting as a class, and I have, threw a camera in my hand, and I was like, I'm good at talking about sports. My parents always say I could be an analyst and a commentator. So why don't I talk sports? And I think it's something that really more people are going to start doing. I think the world of podcasts is only evolving and growing in so many ways, because nowadays you could literally sit down in front of a computer or a camera or a phone, talk about anything for hours. And there will be some people who will decide to waste the time of their day and click on the video and listen to it for 2 hours. Thank you for wasting your 2 hours of time to listen to me talk. Like, that's what I can tell them. It's awesome. It's really awesome to have a podcast to start to find out how much I actually love doing things like this. So yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I still have to learn. And I think for having you on here, especially like in the beginning of my podcast, is something that is really going to benefit me. So I have a few more questions. What was something that brought you into your mind to really think about going from interviewing players and then talking to coaches and interviewing coaches about these players. Like it's kind of like it's like a two-part episode of a TV show. Like how do you go about that?
So the coaching part was another thing I always like I said, at the end of the day, I love talking basketball, and they're obviously just as big a piece of basketball as the players are. So I didn't know any college coaches pretty much at all, maybe a couple of them just briefly because of prior relationships or whatnot. But I started getting to know them. As I said, I know a lot of coaches see me not just as someone that does interviews, but also help coaches with recruiting, help give them advice. I get calls and texts from coaches all the time, asking about certain players or what's my thoughts on them. Should we offer this kid or that kid, whatever it is. And over time, after that started happening, I started getting to know these coaches more and more. Coaches like Nate Oates out there at Alabama and Drew Valentine, one of the closest ones I'm with out there at Loyola Chicago. And the list goes on. It's kind of like coaches I know now. So as that relationship kept growing with these coaches, I started saying, okay, might as well just get them on too. I know they like talking about their stuff. Obviously, they're busy during the season. It's not really time to get them on during season, but I always usually get them on during the off season. So just getting them to come on, share their stories, talk about the players, talk about whatever it might be. That's been a huge thing I've loved doing too. And obviously, it's still basketball. Everyone still wants to hear from the coaches as well. So it's kind of worked together, and I just decided to keep going with it.
That's really cool because to know college basketball coaches is kind of really obsolete. Like college basketball is huge. I don't think people realize how many schools there are in this country. Like Loyola Chicago wasn't known until March Madness 3 years ago, but you build a relationship with that coach, and now they're a huge school. They pulled off one of the greatest runs.
Yep.
I have a question for you about your content and something similar to this. Do you think that you could ever expand to really, like, I guess you call it vlogging now, when you bring yourself to a game, hold the camera in front of your face and talk, like do a live podcast, maybe at a game, you do a little bit of commentary while you're there, interview some players and coaches after. You ever thought about that?
That's something I've always considered. I used to be more getting into the analyst, being a sideline reporter type of stuff. And that's something I obviously have to consider. I know going to games is something that I was planning on doing a lot more this year. Then the whole COVID outbreak happened, and traveling, just not knowing the schedule, kind of affected that quite a bit. So going and traveling and doing different stuff like that is something that's definitely a possibility. I know that's different people I've talked to. I know most of the time to get those sideline opportunities, because a lot of time you can't get tickets for that. It's something that schools have to give you. And I know a lot of schools would give me the okay, and the coaches I know would find a way to get me down there. But just in a way, doing that something I would be interested in sometime. I think right now I'm sticking to more of the at-home podcasting and reporting in that sense. But that is something that I'm open to down the road for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've been thinking about. I'm like, living in such like a huge area for sports. Arizona's a big sports market. New York's also a big sports market. There's so much right there. It's just always been something that's on my mind. Like for the last 4 months, I've been thinking about, like, I gotta get down to a game and figure something out. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's something that has always been really intriguing to me. Now, what's your plans for March Madness? What's your plans for covering that and interviews on that? Because it's coming up and it's going to be huge. It's going to give you a really good opportunity to grow and blow up again.
Yeah, so I'm considering, I've been thinking about it, going out to Vegas for their portion. I know they have a lot of the big conference tournaments on the West Coast. The West Coast Conference, I believe, plays there. I know the Pac-12 is there. Mountain West might be there too. I'm not exactly. I think they are actually there. So a lot of big tournaments can be played in Vegas throughout that time span. I'm considering going to that. I know it's something I'm really thinking about looking at right now, but the biggest thing that I know is that in terms of just my YouTube videos and what I have on that aspect already, there might not be too many player interviews that are of guys in March Madness at that point, just because they're going to be busy focused on whatever the game is, bang, 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 in terms of games there. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of countries already done with the season then, so I'll probably start interviewing those guys, and we'll go right into the transfer portal then, which is a hectic time for me. So that's crazy. But a lot of guys that you see that are in March Madness that are playing, those interviews, views will go up a bunch because of just their players becoming bigger and bigger names. So guys like Mark Sears will become a lot more well-known. Jalen Williams at Santa Clara, even just the guys that already know, like if Syracuse makes a run, happens to sneak in there somehow by winning the ACC tournament, a Buddy Boeheim, he's going to get bigger and bigger names. And so those views of videos will go up a bunch. So that's the aspect. Just I kind of look at March Madness though more so of enjoying it, just because that is, I mean, it's not too long. It's 2.5, 3 weeks, whatever it is. So it's not too long. And you have most of the time, you have the 5 days or 4 days in between the weeks that nothing's going on. So I can still get interviews done there. Like I said, most people probably focusing at that point on high school recruits guys getting ready to go to college. So wrapping up those guys in the 2022 class. But also, if there is a chance for me or some guys want to hop on and do something while they are out there, whatever they're at, getting ready for the game, I'll definitely have them on too.
Yeah, I mean, March Madness is probably one of the biggest college sports. It's maybe right behind the national championship, college football playoffs. It's probably neck and neck the biggest sports event for college. And so, yeah, that's a really, really huge opportunity for guys like you. Hopefully for someone like me, I'm working on some stuff. And so it's great to kind of get closer to that. We're inching closer there. It's kind of moving along pretty slow. But I have one more question, and then I'm not going to take too much of your time. I know you're always busy. My last question for you is, do you see yourself getting to the point still where you want to be a GM of an NBA team, or do you really kind of want to focus in on this and just continue with this until you have your talk show?
My main goal right now is keeping it towards the media aspect. But what a lot of people don't know is, for me, what I've decided to do is, I am in college right now. I do it all online though, so I don't actually go to campus. I just decided to keep it online. I did that before. I kind of decided that once I made the transition away from basketball, just to say I want online since before even COVID came into play, just because I know how to get my work done. I've always been someone that gets work done extremely quickly through high school. That was never a problem. I'd be done 10, 15 minutes in high school. The rest of the day, I'd be just doing my own stuff anyway. So I knew that I could get college done easily with no problem. So I just kind of work on that the night times for 15, 20 minutes each time, just get it done with. But that's part's always been easy. So I don't think going on campus and wasting time would be worth it for me when I could get it done easily. So I decided to take that aspect, but that allowed me to mostly focus in on the media aspect for now. And that's my main goal. At the same time, though, my education isn't in media or broadcasting or anything like that. I've kept it in sports management. So I know talking to a lot of different media guys, like, you don't necessarily need a degree in broadcasting to do it. Now, it can help you develop if you need help developing it or all that stuff. There's nothing wrong with getting that by any means. But in terms of just being qualified to get on TV someday, the biggest thing they want is talent, your name, branding, that type of stuff. Now, they do want you to have some type of degree too. So sports management's got that covered then for me. So it also then allows me to, if for some reason I decide at some point when I have my own show or whatever, I want to swap over. I want to go become a GM. I want to become the front office. That's been done countless times now. You see that all the time with media guys taking that front office role. So that leaves the window open for me. If that time does come, I have the education background. I know what to do. I could then swap over into the front office role and be that too down the road if I want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like a plan. I think you have your life mapped out for you. I think it's all gonna come into fruition. I think, like you said, God has everything in store for you. He's laid it out on a path for you, and I think you're just following that path really to the best of your abilities. Your content's amazing. And so with that, like I said, guys, I linked your social medias in the description. So guys, if you don't know who he is, please go watch his content, go subscribe, go follow him on Instagram. He posts all the time. You post like 4 times a week now, 5 times a week.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you're always going to have something to watch. They're never going to be behind on anything if you keep up with it. So trust me, it's organized, it's good, it's really quality content, interviews. You'll learn a lot from athletes. So thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Of course, man. Appreciate having me on today. It was a great time, man.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You're really, really, really good person to interview. I appreciate everything you've done.
Of course, man. Keep up the great work, man. I know God's got big things in store for you too, man.
Thank you so much.